2 panelists, since this is more of a conversational style working group. And as a reminder, you probably saw a prompt come up that this meeting is being recorded. The videos of this CWG meetings are posted to the San Diego Conformity Working Group website on SANDAG's page as a recording of the meeting. Promoting a few other people that as they come in. Okay, so we've gone through kind of the housekeeping items. As far as members of the public, if there are any members of the public you'd like to address the CWG, we just ask that you use the raised hand feature in this platform, and then we can unmute your microphone to enable you to speak. And I already mentioned this meeting is being recorded for posting on the SANDAG CWG website. All right, so welcome and introductions. I'm going to attempt to go through the list of panelists as we go through and list who is here and agencies they're from. At the end, I will pause to see who I missed, because as people join, it jumps around on me quite a bit as far as who's here. So I can see from SANDAG, myself from SANDAG Planning. I'm also joined from SANDAG Planning by Elisa Arias and Phil Traum. From SANDAG modeling team and forecasting, we have Rachel Cortez. And from SANDAG Transnet and Programming, we have Susan Huntington, Richard Radcliffe, and Sue Alpert. Also from SANDAG Planning, we have Zach Brandt. From Federal Highways, we have Joseph Vaughn. From Caltrans headquarters, Lucas Sanchez, Lexi Arellano, and Rodney Tavidas, and Jacqueline Cars. From Caltrans District 11, we have Maurice Eaton and Diane Remulin. And from CARB, we have Nesamani Kalandiur. And from San Diego APCD, we have Nick Cormier. Anyone else I missed? I'll scroll through, see all the names. Okay. That might be a sign that I actually caught everybody this time, which would be a first. But keep on practicing. As others join, I will try to capture them and introduce them as we move forward. And there's a few more coming in. We also have Stephanie Parent and Kevin from CARB as well joining the meeting. Welcome, everyone. And now if I get my slides to advance, there we go. All right, so at this time for agenda item number two, excuse me, I want to pause here to see if there's any members of the public that have any comments for the CWG. Please use the raised hand function and we can unmute your microphone. And you see me glancing around as I am trying to locate the different screens and see if anybody has a raised hand. I'm not seeing any at this time. As far as communication and member comments, I have 2 brief comments, and then I'll pause to see if there's any other members of the CWG that have comments they'd like to share. First, amendment number 1 for the 2021 RTIP was shared with the Conformity Working Group. Comments are requested by this Friday, April 9th. This amendment is scheduled to go to the SANDAG Board of Directors on April 30th. It is what was shared was a list of exempt projects, was sent out on March 30th. Second brief announcement, I really want to thank Caltrans headquarters for hosting the statewide Conformity Working Group back in February 9th. Had a great meeting, a lot of good information shared at that one as well. So thanks again. Anyone else have any member comments you'd like to share? All right. We'll move on into more of the meat of the agenda. First, minutes from our last meeting. It's been a little while since we've had a meeting. So we have the agenda item 3 are the minutes from the January 6th, 2021 meeting. Are there any comments or corrections on those meeting minutes? Hearing none, we'll move on to number 4, getting into the first discussion item. So item number 4 is an update on 2 of the conformity criteria for the 2021 regional plan. SANDAG initially presented information on conformity criteria to the CWG back in June 2019, and since then we've been providing updates on these criteria, procedures, and criteria as needed. Today's item includes an update on the revenue constrained financial assumptions, the 2050 regional growth forecast and sustainable community strategies land use pattern. And then it's also, we released the interim draft of the full appendix that has the documentation for your review and the 30-day review following interagency consultation process. So advancing one more, getting to part 4A. As mentioned, this is an update on the revenue constrained financial assumptions. For your reference, there's an attachment to today's agenda on this update that begins on page 7. I just have a little screenshot here so you can see what that looks like of that. And for this part, I'm going to turn it over to Susan Huntington from SANDAG's Transnet Department of the Financial Division.
Thanks, Sam. Good morning. As Sam mentioned, I'm Susan Huntington. I'm the Manager of Financial Planning and Project Control at SANDAG. I'm sure that all of you are remembering when I presented in June of 2019, and we went through the revenue assumptions, which are supporting the 2021 regional plan. But I'm here to go over that with you again because there have been some changes. So we have done a couple updates to the revenue forecast. The assumptions made for each major revenue source have been provided in the attachment that Sam mentioned that starts on page 7. And our goal always is to develop a revenue estimate that's reasonably expected sources of funding and growth and whatnot. So in terms of the attachment that you have in the report today, our approach has been twofold in the development of these revenue sources. So it's split between existing and new sources. So the existing sources includes all of the existing revenue sources growing at reasonable rates over time. And then this category also assumes the continuation or renewal or extension of existing sources of funds based on the long-term historical experience of legislation. So existing revenues, examples of that, which would be like our local sales tax, including Transnet or state and federal formula funds. A continuation of revenues, an example of that would be the reauthorization of federal transportation bills or statewide transportation measures beyond their current sunset date, but it is reasonable, we believe, to assume that those sources will continue through updated legislation. And so we have the attachment that goes through the local existing, the state existing, and the federal existing. And then at the bottom, we have a number of new revenue streams. Many of them were included in our prior 2015 plan, but there's assumptions have been updated for the 2021 plan. So overall, the takeaway is that our region continues to rely heavily on local sources of revenue. Our region's success in providing local sources increases our ability to secure federal and state funding and have leveraging. And then in regards to the new funding sources, except for the state housing revenue, which is already in state legislation, these sources are not assumed to start until 2026, creating an opportunity to conduct policy and technical studies to examine and demonstrate the viability of these sources. So to orient you with the table, the local sources are listed on rows 1 through 10, so pages 1 through 4 of the attachment. The state sources are on rows 11 through 18, or pages 5 through 8. Federal sources are on pages 9 through 11, and then the new sources start on page 12 of the attachment. I did want to mention also that as part of our process, in addition to coming and presenting here at CWG back in June, we've also gone through a peer review process. Our PRP was held on May 5th, 2020, and the purpose of our peer review process is to review, discuss, and gain consensus on the revenue assumptions, the data sources that we should be using, basing our assumptions upon, as well as the estimated growth rates. The PRP included both internal and external stakeholders and subject matter experts. The short-term Transnet revenue assumptions, and you'll see this all documented on the first page of the attachment, but I did want to talk about how we estimate our Transnet revenue. So our revenue assumptions use the California Department of Tax and Fees, CDTFA, sales tax revenue allocation formula, as well as quarterly factors such as year-to-date sales tax collections, the forecast provided by Standag Tax Consultant Muni Services, and the general economic conditions. So that's for the short-term revenue, and those are as recently updated as of December 2020. So we have been updating those in accordance with the changing economic conditions resulting from COVID. The long-term Transnet revenue estimates are based on the growth rate in taxable retail sales based on the population forecast from the California Department of Finance, as well as the consensus of 3 independent forecasts of real rates of growth in per capita retail sales and projected inflation rates. So those forecasts are coming from IHS Global Insight, Moody's, and Oxford Economic Forecasting. So this was a change in how we are doing our economic forecasting by using these nationally recognized forecasts. So then I want to get into our new sources of funds, and that begins on page 12. Can't recall, let's see. Let me get there so I can follow along as we're going through this. Yep, so that starts on page 12 of the attachment, or page 18 of the PDF. And yep.
Can we pause right there? I see
Sure.
a hand up from Maurice Eaton.
Sure.
I was just curious, Susan, are you trying to step through like on slides? Because I'm still looking at the first slide that you put up. Were you like changing slides as you go, or?
I was following along with the attachment in the agenda.
I can bring that up. That would be helpful.
Okay, thank you.
So Sam, it's page 18 of the PDF. Yep. Future local revenues. Yep. So these future local revenues are a new sales tax for transportation. And for the 2021 plan, we have included a 0.5-cent sales tax set to begin after the 2024 presidential election. The new revenue source is proposed to start after the current RTIP period. And that will happen, and that is based on the same growth as the current Transnet growth rate. Row 28 is the future MTS local revenues. So this is a new local measure sponsored by San Diego Metropolitan Transit Systems, MTS. Existing law authorizes both MTS and NCTD to impose a specified tax, transaction and use tax, and MTS has gone and done community outreach and is currently exploring placing a measure on the 2024 presidential election ballot. So we went ahead and included the revenues from that measure in the plan. The plan assumes a one half cent measure, again, starting after the 2024 presidential election. And based on communications with MTS, roughly 40% of the revenue generated would go towards capital projects, and roughly 60% would go towards operations of their system. Row 29, this is a new revenue source that we're assuming for this plan. We noted that other regions have tried to address VMT and congestion by levying a fee on TNCs. And then that fee is then used to mitigate the impacts of the VMT and congestion by generating, it generates revenue that can then be used for transit and other shared use modes. So what we've included for this plan, it assumes a fee of $1.25 for non-pooled trips and 65 cents for pooled trips. And then those revenues, again, aren't assumed to start until 2026. This revenue would bring in roughly $2.2 billion. We also have included, next page, Sam, future potential state fees from vehicle mile travel program. We had included future state revenue in our previous plans. We know that California initiated the pilot project in 2017. And 2018, then extended the road charge technical advisory committee out till 2023. So right now the committee is still taking public comments, thinking about technology, and so is moving down this path towards a VMT. California obviously is not alone in testing this kind of program. And the other states that we've found that are doing this are Utah, Texas, Oregon, and several others. So in the 2021 plan, we assume the fee to start in 2026 at 2 cents per mile. And then that rate grows annually until 2034, and then assumes no growth from 2034 to 2050. The next fund type that we have included is the future regional road user charge, which really leverages the statewide system for regional road user charge to benefit San Diego in order to address the regional priority projects. And this also, we also assume a fee of 2 cents per mile in alignment with the state fee. We've included the state housing revenue. This I put under new, even because we hadn't included state housing revenue for transportation infrastructure in prior plans. But this isn't new in that these revenues are already part of legislation, and so we haven't assumed anything beyond what's already in state legislation for SB 795. And then finally, on our new revenue sources is the future increase to the federal fuel taxes. And this reflects our ongoing assumptions that at the federal level, there will be some attention to and recommendations for expanding the federal tax or coming up with some sort of future federal revenue to address long-term infrastructure programs and shortfalls. So just to wrap up, in the short term, we've assumed very conservative growth rate, roughly around 2%, 2 to 3%. And then outside of the programming period, the growth rate tends to be a little bit higher in order to reflect kind of some of those longer term anticipated growth rates. And staff will be developing a transportation network scenario based upon these initial revenue assumptions. And as project costs are refined, the revenues will be finalized, incorporated into a final document. And we believe that these assumed revenues and growth rates are reasonable and consistent with prior experience. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Susan. Are there any questions or comments for Susan? Okay, I see both Elisa and Maurice have their hand up. I think it was a tie. I don't know who came first.
Mine is not a question. I just wanted to make sure that the Conformity Work Group is aware that John Kelly also joined shortly after we did introductions. So John Kelly from EPA is also has also joined the meeting. Thanks.
Thank you, Elisa. And welcome, John. Maurice.
Just a question for Susan, and I'm not necessarily expecting an answer, but maybe it's just something to talk through or to consider. But I was wondering, Susan, as you're kind of going through the presentation, and you mentioned a presumption of future revenue sources extending beyond current sunset dates. I'm wondering, have you guys given some thought to examining risk there? In other words, understanding what the risk is, if in fact there isn't an extension of certain funding sources beyond the sunset dates. And I just say that knowing regionally that there's been in past years some high sensitivity to revenue forecasts that have been done. So, sort of recognizing that in our current work, I'm just wondering about, the ask isn't, hey, you guys go out and change what you're doing. I'm just saying, have you given some thought to understanding sort of a risk or risks that could be associated with certain assumptions?
So I think that's a really good point, and that's why we do remain very constrained in the short-term period. We do not assume anything new is going to happen before we have the opportunity to update the plan in 4 years from now. So, for example, there may be legislation that we assume will happen after the short-term period, the RTIP period. And as we're going along and have the opportunity to update, then certainly we'll be assessing that. So to respond to your question, I would say that in order to respond to risk, we push anything that may be more uncertain out past the initial period, so that we are not building projects into the plan that are relying on those more uncertain revenues coming in.
Great, thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Maurice, for that. Any others?
Okay.
Not hearing any. Thank you so much, Susan. I appreciate that report.
Sure. Thank you.
We'll move on to part 4B. So sticking with the regional plan, we're now moving on to the regional growth forecast, sustainable community strategy, land use pattern. This is, again, an update. Information on this was presented prior. Now we just have an update for this. For your reference, there's details included in today's agenda on page 23. And for part 4B, I'm going to turn this over to Rachel Cordes from Sandag's Economics, Demographic Forecasting and Modeling team.
Thanks, Sam. I have yeah, thank you. So I'm going to give a brief recap on the efforts that we've been under the regional and sub-regional sustainable communities land use pattern that we're using for the 2020 plan. So the process to build the forecast takes place in stages. The first is to develop the region-wide forecast of population, jobs, and houses from 2050. And this is a variety of external data sources and rates data for the region, along with assumptions about how the region projected. So as you can chart, about 37 persons in the region, about 140,000 more jobs, and about 207,000 over the 34-year period. The region-wide forecast serves as an input for the sub-regional allocation of population, housing units, and jobs at the smaller geographies for the county. These are the data that are used for the transportation efforts for the plan and a variety of other research and planning efforts. In order to place this growth throughout the region, information on housing unit capacity that was collected over several months from each planning staff is used, along with on existing demographics and area and the assumptions of how it may change. Could you slide, please? After developing housing unit capacity assumptions for the sub-regional allocation last summer, data and modeling and planning staff started to develop a plan for develop data and a methodology for the sustainable community strategy land use pattern. So the SCS land use pattern concentrates all future growth into areas shown on this map that are called mobility hubs. Mobility hub areas throughout the region where there's a concentration of transport options, housing, and these areas to concentrate future growth helps ensure development of transformation investments in the region. So that's actually the end of the slides that I have prepared, but if there were questions, would be great, or I'll stick around if there's questions.
Thank you, Rachel. Any questions or comments on the growth and land use section? All right. Well, thank you so much, Rachel. I appreciate that. Moving on to part C of item number 4, we actually have attached the preliminary draft air quality planning and transportation conformity documentation. So this document is being shared with the CWG prior to the release of the draft plan per interagency consultation process. So I'd like to ask, as we go through and review this over the next several weeks, if you have any comments regarding this document, to please send those my way by Thursday, May 7th, would be greatly appreciated. For your reference, this document begins on page 27 of today's agenda. And there are a couple of sections that I want to bring to your attention. So I'm going to actually switch over to the agenda slide here and go to page 27. Sorry for the quick scrolling. So as far as the structure of the document, oh, it switched back on me. There we go. As far as the structure of the document, it is set to demonstrate conformity for 2 different SIPs, right? So we have our existing SIP right now where the budgets are approved for transportation conformity purposes. So there are sections that speak to that SIP, which in this document we are calling the 2016 SIP, which is the approval date from San Diego APCD. We also have sections that talk about the 2020 SIP and how the regional plan complies with conformity and budgets for that SIP, although not yet approved. We're designing the document that we can demonstrate conformity regardless of which SIP is in effect at the time of adoption. So you'll see those sections change as you go through the document. And if I just scroll down a little bit and give you an example, here we reference 2016 SIP, which is the year APCD adopted that SIP. If you look at CARB's website, that's the 2017 SIP, same one. Each of these paragraphs refers to the SIP it's related to. once we have a final, we know which SIP is going to be used at the adoption date, we can remove the text that no longer applies. So that's part one that I wanted to bring to your attention. The second part is getting to page 57 of the agenda. Jump down there, avoid some of the scrolling. Prior to this, it does go through all the conformity criteria as these documents have that you guys have reviewed in past plans, modeling documentation, consultation process, so on and so forth. On this page, we start the emission modeling results. And so again, here we have the modeling results from the 2016 SIP, those budgets that were approved for transportation conformity process are listed in table C9A. And then following that, we have the same setup for the 2020 SIP and the budgets that we expect from the 2020 SIP, which is still undergoing the approval process. Now, when we have anything related to the 2020 SIP, we do include the voluntary reclassifications for both the 2008 ozone standard going from serious to severe and the 2015 ozone standard going from moderate to severe. That is included in this as well. If I scroll a little bit further down to page 60 in the agenda, or 36 on the actual document, we get to the exempt project list. This starts out with all the active transportation projects. So you have your bikeway, rail trail, pedestrian projects listed. The following page includes the safety improvement program, transit terminals, and then also our transportation system and demand management on here. Following this, we get to our actual project tables. And there are some sections that will need to be updated on this as far as our outreach, like today, and our consultation process will have to be documented. So starting on really page 40 of the appendix, or I believe it is 64 of the today's agenda, we get into the project tables. One thing that is distinct in this plan is the way the projects are listed. In the past, we had highway, then we had highway connectors, managed lanes connectors, and so forth. For this plan, we're actually organizing them by corridor. So we have several corridors. So starting out with South Bay to Sorrento, and then we have the capacity increasing projects listed there. This starts out with all the conformity analysis years for the 2016 SIP. And it'll go through all the corridors, and then it'll be followed by the same table with the 2020 SIP analysis years. So I wanted to just give you a little heads up on this structure so you understood it and you can see it as you go through, and it has your same types of projects. So it has your complete corridor, your managed lanes, transit changes, goods movement. And for this corridor, there's quite a number of projects. And then we go to a second corridor, the Central Mobility Hub, and what's incorporated in that area, and then along SR 125 and the projects that are incorporated in that area. So I wanted to pause there, and those are really the key pieces I wanted to highlight in this attachment to agenda item 4, and see if there's any comments or questions from CWG. Yeah, Nasamani.
Hey, Sam, good morning. Hey, quick question, just a clarification one. On the conformity budgets that you showed the tables, two tables. So the activity, the VMT that's included for the estimation of emissions, does it include any of your off-model strategies, for example, van pool, any of those things, or is it just a purely from the travel demand model network, the travel demand analysis that you guys done for this plan? Is it based on that?
Very good question. It is just from our travel demand model. There are no off-model recalculations or adjustments to VMT.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to make sure that. Yeah, I'll go through the document. I didn't get a chance to look at it. I'll spend some time. Thanks.
I appreciate that. And yes, so and I understand that people have not had a chance to go through the document yet, so I appreciate the following along with me today. And then as you have comments, please share those. There was a oops in the first send out of the document that made one of the tables illegible, so we fixed that. But as you find other things, please let us know. I want to see, Elisa, do you want to add anything on to that as well?
Yeah, just to add to Nesamane's question, we had talked possibly about in the future adjusting the VMT to match the VMT that we report to the state to CARB specifically on the SP 375 greenhouse gas emissions. For this conformity determination money, we have not made any adjustments. This is a straight output from the ABM model. So the VMT has not been adjusted before going into MFAC. And this is something that we would like to discuss with the conformity working group at future meetings to see how we can make the VMT data more consistent between the conformity process and the SP 375 process.
Yeah, thanks, Alyssa. Yeah, thanks for explaining that in detail. Yeah.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you, Elisa. Nick Cormier, I see your hand is up as well.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Just a quick couple comments and then a question. Just appreciate you guys putting this together. I know it's a lot of work kind of duplicating things with both of the different SIPs and the situation you're in. So but we do really appreciate that. And frankly, congrats on getting to meeting those tough budgets, in especially the early years. I saw on one of those tables. It was close, but you got there. So it's a good thing to see. I was a little curious about that myself in the last couple months, how it was going to be done, but it's good to see here. I like others, I haven't had a chance to fully review the document, so I'll go ahead and do that in the next couple weeks. But what date did you say for comments if we wanted to submit them? Did you?
If you could get those back to me by May 7th, that'd be
May 7th.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. And then the only other thing was in terms of the new setup of the project tables, I do like the inclusion of the category in which those projects kind of fit into, goods movement or, complete, the transit leap and that sort of thing. So I do like how it's set up now. And I think it's a lot more understandable from an outside perspective, especially fitting in with the whole theme that I think you guys are going for, which is those 5 big moves. So I'm a big fan of that. Just my first look at it though. So thanks.
Thank you, Nick. I appreciate that comment. And that is a lot of the concept behind that structure was to make it a little bit more digestible and relatable for people outside transportation planning and work. One other piece that I neglected to mention that I think we'll find helpful on the technical side is unique identifiers for each project. Will also help us be able to track projects and comments to projects and any changes much easier than we've had in the past. Elisa, I see your hand up as well.
Yeah, and on the comment period, we would definitely appreciate any comments from the conformity working group by May 7th, as Sam was mentioning. It would allow us to still be able to incorporate, address your comments for the draft plan. The draft regional plan is scheduled to be released on May 28th. So if we get any comments from the conformity working group at May 7th, we should be able to address them and incorporate them into GOGO's public on May 28th. Obviously, the comment period continues for the CWG and starts for the overall public and stakeholders on May 28th. So there's more opportunities to comment, but anything that we receive from you by May 7th, we hope to be able to address for the version that you will see published with the May 28th release of the regional plan.
Thank you, Lisa. Maurice.
So I guess either Sam or maybe Elisa, for the published VMT findings that we're looking at, or maybe they'll be updated at some point. But for the VMT and for the emissions findings, these are being sourced from ABM2 or ABM2 plus?
ABM2 plus.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and sorry, Maurice, I glossed over that at the very beginning. There is several pages on the transportation model that Ing and team have helped develop. They go over all the pieces of ABM2 plus and really what has changed from ABM2. For instance, data input into the model, the structures, how the different types of trips that are included is all included in there as well. So I'd appreciate your eyes on that and any comments you may have as well.
Great, thank you, Sam.
Any other comments or questions? All right. Well, then we will move on to item number 5, which is the 2020 Ozone State Implementation Plan update. And I've asked Nick Cormier if he can provide us with a quick update on information known up to this point on the status.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So I'll just give a quick update on where things stand here, some of which will be a repeat, but so bear with me if you've heard this a little bit, but just so everybody's aware. So first I'll kind of touch on the reclassification of the region to severe. Sam kind of mentioned it in his previous comments, but so we have the 2020 Ozone SIP plan. Within that plan that we did, we proposed to reclassify the region to severe for both ozone standards. That's the 2008 and 2015 ozone standards. We did recently receive word from EPA that they've proposed to take action on specifically that reclassification request. That was anticipated all along, and so we did receive word that the acting administrator on April 2nd signed the notice of proposed rulemaking to reclassify for both of those ozone standards. And so we're anticipating that action potentially coming out in the Federal Register in the next couple of weeks. It hasn't been posted yet, but we did kind of tentatively receive word that it's making its way through the rounds. Yeah, did someone say something?
Yeah, just a quick update that it's going to be published tomorrow.
Oh, great. Fantastic. Great, that's even quicker then. So
very timely, John. Thank you for making that work just in time. It's perfect. There we go. Sorry about that. Got on mute. So that's good. That is great timing, John. Thank you. So after I believe there's a public comment period associated with that action, but you know, assuming if it's warranted and it's possible to do, then they would go ahead and EPA would issue a final rulemaking to approve the reclassification. And the intent, I think, right now is that would probably get done sometime in July of this year, and that would happen prior to our attainment, a non-attainment deadline as a serious non-attainment area for the 2008 standard.
Maybe if I could just make one little refinement on that, Nick.
Sure.
So we'll have a final notice published much sooner than July, and the goal would be to have the effective date, which, you know, generally our effective dates are about 30 days after we take an action for congressional reasons. But the effective date would be before July 20th, which is your attainment date for serious. So that's, I would assume that we'll publish it in June at the very latest for the final.
Great. Yeah, that's a good clarification. Thank you, John. Yeah, so it looks like we'll be officially being reclassified, assuming this all goes anticipated, as a severe area no later than July 20th for the region. So just keep that on your radars. Any questions on the reclassification before I kind of touch more on timing aspects? If not, then I also just wanted to briefly talk about just the timing of you know, budgets and Sandag's plan. And we had a call, Sandag, EPA, and APCD had a brief call about a week or two ago to kind of go over this. So it's still, you know, consider it tentative at this point. But as mentioned, that SIP plan got the 2020 SIP plan got sent to EPA on January 8th. It's now in EPA's house to review. And within that plan, it had the new vehicle emission budgets, which you saw in the conformity analysis that we just took a look at on Sandag's regional plan. Those new budgets, like Sam mentioned, they haven't been found adequate by EPA yet. And so they've kind of accounted for both scenarios of using the budgets that have been found adequate in 2017, and then also looking at the new budgets for the 2020 plan. And so they've kind of accounted for both in this draft regional plan. And like they said, they'll use the one that's in place when they consider their regional plan later this year. If I remember right, December of this year is kind of what they're targeting for their board consideration of that. So it's our understanding that that it sounds like, and John, feel free to chime in if you like, but it's our understanding that they'll be reviewing the new budgets, and potentially in the next few months, if it's warranted, then at that point they would be releasing their adequacy finding for the new budgets, likely after the draft regional plan has been released. Like I said, Elisa, I think, mentioned end of May for that draft to be released. So if there is an adequacy finding for the new budgets, it would probably come after that. But the hope is that it would be done prior to the final regional plan being considered, so that the final regional plan would only consider the new 2020 budgets, and as Sandag mentioned, they would kind of take out all the old budget stuff from their conformity analysis, since it wouldn't really apply at that point. And then kind of concurrent to all that in relation to the regional plan, we are also looking at when is the best time to withdraw our old 2016 ozone plan. And if the new budgets are found adequate later this summer, then it's at that point, then CARB would then submit a request to withdraw that old 2016 ozone SIP plan for the 2008 ozone standard. We don't want to do it too soon, because if we do, and then there's no adequate budgets in place to replace them, that would kind of create a gap of no real budgets in place. So we don't want CARB to take that action too quick, and avoid some unnecessary consequences. So what we're thinking is going to happen is when and if EPA does find those budgets adequate, the new ones, then CARB would go ahead and submit that request to EPA to withdraw the old ozone plan, and then we wouldn't have that issue. And we've spoken to CARB previously about this scenario. They're fully aware of the timing aspect, and they're fine with waiting on it, for a couple months for this to all kind of play out. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop and then pause for any other questions if there are any.
Thanks, Nick, for that update. Any questions for Nick on timing of the 2020 SIP and all the different components of it?
If not,
thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, moving on to agenda item number 6, which is the MFAC 2021 model, the emissions factors that we use for transportation conformity. This one is still under development, has not been approved yet for transportation conformity purposes, but it is in that process. And I wanted to call on Nesamani Kamanajur from CARB to see if there are any updates on this process.
Yeah, hi, Sam. Good morning, everyone. I know last meeting we talked about it, some of the preliminary findings and comparison between MFAC 17 and MFAC 2021. So since then, we released the MFAC 2021 model. It's available on our website. Feel free to download it. As Sam mentioned, it's not yet approved for official purpose, especially the conformity purposes. It's not ready to use, but you can always download and test it and check your information and scenarios and all. You can use it, use the model. It reflects the latest statewide as well as the regional emissions as well as the activities that CARB understands at this point. It also reflects the latest regulations that our board has adopted, example like advanced clean trucks, low NOx emission standards. Some of those programs are already reflected in the MFAC 2021 model. We are also planning to submit it. Right now, we are working on the technical documentation, which will be completed sometime this month. And then we'll be posting it. Along with it, we will be submitting to US EPA in next few months. So that's the current kind of a timeline at this point. We also released the web platform along with this model, which is user-friendly and useful. You don't need to install the model. It gives you the same opportunities. What I mean here is the same platform that you could use it, similar to the desktop version. In the previous web platform, it only provided the emissions and the default activity. But in this case, you can generate scenarios, you can change the default input variables and run the model itself on the web platform. So you can generate the output file as well. So we encourage you to use the web platform more and more. So that way, if you have any issues, we could quickly fix it and make it implementable quickly rather than releasing another version of software and everything. So that's the reason why we are slowly moving towards the web platform itself. We also posted the user guide. Feel free to go through the user guide. If you have any questions, you can always send your questions to mfac@erb.ca.gov, or you can also reach out to me. I'll be happy to coordinate and make sure that you get your response back. That's pretty much my update on MFAC. I'll be happy to answer any question on that.
Thank you, Nesamani. Any questions or comments for Nesamani on the MFAC 2021 model? A quick one from me, Nesamani. Are there any other additional conversations regarding safe rule and incorporation of that or removal of that rule, since there's a stay, I think, on the litigation aspect, but that there's also movement legislatively on how to handle safe rule and adjustments to that. So I don't know if part of the pause on MFAC 2021 is waiting for that to resolve, or does this need to move forward before that's resolved and we'll handle it with a off-model calculator or some other process?
Yeah. So to answer your question, Sam, right now the MFAC 2021 reflects the safe vehicle rule because that's the current law at this point. So I know there is lots of conversations happening with the new administration. They're planning to remove it. So once the US EPA adopts that new regulation, then we will be able to remove it. Again, it's all we need to wait for the timing. At what time US EPA is going to approve it, we may have to release another version, or we need to give you a adjustment factor. So those are the things we haven't really dealt yet. But just to answer your question directly, right now the MFAC 2021 model already reflects the safe vehicle rule adjustment that we released maybe end of last year for the MFAC 2017 model and 2014 model. It's reflected in this model directly. We don't need to do any adjustment. That's what I'm trying to say here.
Okay. Thank you. That is helpful. Appreciate that.
Hi, Sam. This is Rodney Tavitas. We have been monitoring the Federal Register, and the safe rule has not been issued yet because I've heard that they're possibly going to revoke it. So I have staff monitoring the register every single day. So once that happens, we'll be happy to send it out statewide.
Appreciate that, Rodney. Thank you so much.
Sorry, this is Nick in San Diego. This is maybe a SIP related question for John potentially, but how does that, if it does get revoked, either Nesamani or John, what does that mean then for the budgets that we did include in our 2020 SIP plan? If I understood Nesamani's comment right, then it wouldn't, the budgets that could be approved this summer would still apply as long as there's as long as the new safe rule, whatever you want to call it, isn't in place? Or can anybody shed a little light on that? Like, what do we need to be concerned in any way to get these budgets approved before that happens, or maybe it's not an issue?
Nesamani, let me let you go first. I definitely have a little information on this, but it's probably a little more tentative than what Karina O'Connor could provide to the group. But Nesamani, would you like to take this on?
Sure. Yeah, I can throw at this point. So Nick, I think at this point, what will happen is whatever it's there in front of US EPA, they will go ahead and approve it if the federal government is not revoking this rule at this point. But in the future, if needed, we could re-establish the budget. That could be an option. We may have to do that. That's what, depending upon the adequacy finding, before the plan is approved, we could go back and reset the budget. But just to give you a little bit in a big picture context, the safe rule is very minor impact. I don't think it's going to change the budget significantly one way or the other. Let me make that clear for you. So even if you remove it or if you include it, it's not going to change. I don't have the number in front of me, or it's not in my memory right now. It's a very small fraction for Sandag region itself. So that's what it is. But again, it's all the timing. We don't have a clear timing at this point at what time these actions will happen and how the next steps we could go on, and what are the timing. I don't have a clear clarity on that, so that's why I'm not able to give you a clear kind of a sense to move forward here. I don't know whether, John, you want to add anything more to that?
Maybe just that from my, I mean, this is not something to quote EPA as saying necessarily, but from what I remember, when this was when SAFE was being first being discussed, it seemed like the impact was a little bit further out in like future model years. And so the year 2026 is in my mind for some reason. I got the impression that the SAFE rule wouldn't really affect years very much before that. So I would think that, we've got some time here to kind of figure this out, set it up, and it shouldn't really affect the current year in front of us that you have to demonstrate conformity to, but maybe the out years. I don't know if that helps or not, but that might be one perspective to think about this.
Yeah, you're right. I think, John, I think the budget itself goes only till, I think for 2015 standard, I think it goes till 2031 or something like that. But the Sandag has to demonstrate the plan for out year. Like their plan goes all the way 2050, Sandag's regional transportation plan. So that's what they will be, they need to do it for the further adoption.
Yeah, I think both you guys are right. That overall there wasn't very much of an impact from the SAFE rule that was included in the SIP. There was very minor, addition. So I agree. I don't think it'll impact it that much. I guess my concern was, if there was anything that was gonna throw off, an adequacy finding in any way, or potentially with Sandag's, numbers, even though it's a very small, very, very small change in the early years, I think it may not even show up, to be honest, in the model. That was just my main concern in bringing it up. If it was something we need to, kind of prioritize, to avoid any, potential issues. But since we don't, I don't think any of us really quite know, what the action is coming, even though it sounds like there's a revoking potentially on the way. Maybe we'll just kind of wait and see to see what happens and then address it when we get there.
Well,
So-
I certainly appreciate the point being raised, and because it will be something I'll make sure to keep in mind when I'm working on the adequacy myself, when I'm working on the adequacy for the budgets, and I'll be, we always work pretty closely with our headquarters at OTAC, so I'm sure they'll have more to say about this when we get there.
Hey, this is Stephanie at CARB. I just was pulling up the conformity write-up section that we had sent the district. So I just wanted to confirm, yes, the safe rule adjustments are pretty small, like, at most like 0.02 NOx in like 2032. And for 2026, for the 75 ppb standard, it's 0.01 NOx tons per day.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. It was very small from what I recall. So yeah, that's good to hear. It's in the hundreds of tons per day. So very, very minor.
Yeah, hi, this is Rodney Tavis, Caltrans headquarters. And what I can do is we are going to have our next statewide conformity working group sometime in September. And I can have this as an item that we can discuss. Because I think what the group is concerned about is this going to require a new conformity determination. I mean, the numbers are great, but I think for us, will this trigger another one? So again, I will ask Karina, and I'll have my staff make this an agenda item so we can at least talk about the conformity impacts if there is any at all. Thank you.
This has been a great discussion, and as part of that, I guess, Rodney, maybe trying to capture Nick's idea from earlier, if this would require new budgets or a recalculation of budgets within SIPs, since those that have been adopted recently incorporate the safe rule adjustment in the development of those budgets.
Yeah, that would have to be something I'd have to coordinate with US EPA, and they would have to coordinate with OTAC and CARB.
Let's just say that I've not heard anything about anybody saying, new SIPs have to be submitted because of safe rule. So I would not anticipate that being a thing, but that would be a big surprise to me.
Yeah,
it's no small feat submitting a SIP. We're going ahead with approval, proposing to approve the San Diego SIP that they just gave us, and we'll move forward with making the budgets adequate. But to me, this is stuff that we can deal with internally in our assessment of what's been submitted, and in the adequacy process itself. We'll take comment from people. I don't think anyone would be able to comment successfully to say that some tiny minor amount of the budget is going to upset the entire budget process. So I think this is important to discuss and to talk about how we'll address it, but I don't anticipate any like new submittals or anything like that.
Yeah, it's minor. It's really minor, as John mentioned, and I've had discussions with Karina as well. It's minor. So again, hopefully in the next statewide conformity working group meeting, we can get a lot of these questions answered.
Great. I'm looking forward to that next meeting. This is a really good discussion we had for item number 6 on the next MFAC model. Any other comments or questions? Okay, moving on to kind of our next meeting we have scheduled for Wednesday, May 5th, same time, same place. And I do want to make one correction from earlier on in the announcements I made at the beginning of the meeting regarding amendment number 1 to the 2021 RTIP. That is actually going to the SENDAG board on April 23rd. Are there any other comments from CWG members for the benefit of the group before we adjourn? Not hearing any. I would like to thank everybody for your time and your attention, and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you for
Thanks, Sam.
joining.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thanks, Sam.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.